Merry Christmas, Central Family. I'm Bob Winger, and this is my wife, Nancy. And as part of the kickoff for the Christmas series on the Nativity, we'd like to share with you our very special Christmas set. We made this set 54 years ago when I was in the Air Force, stationed at Biloxi Air Force Base. And we like to go down to the ceramics hobby shop and do different projects. And the one that we enjoyed doing the most and the most challenging was building this 18-piece nativity set. We would have molds that we would pour clay slip into, and once the slip was set up properly, that we would pour it out and we would take the figures out of the molds and then clean them up as green work, removing all the imperfections. And then once we'd done that, we went ahead and we'd fire it, and then the next step was to paint each one of them with a glaze, an opal glaze, which you can see has a kind of a rainbow effect to it. And we really have made this set part of our Christmas decorations every year since.
I remember when we made it, we had to pour the tallest camel 2 or 3 times because it kept collapsing. And we made baby Jesus, two baby Jesus, just in case one of them got broken. We really love our set because we made it ourselves and we put so much love and time into it. And also because it is a central part of our Christmas celebration as we remember Jesus' birth. And I'm going to be reading Matthew 2, 1 through 12 today as part of our scripture for today, and it highlights talking about the Magi, which you can see in our set is right there in front. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. May the Lord richly bless your celebration of Jesus' birth this year.
Merry Christmas.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bob and Nancy, for sharing that. And if you guys have a nativity set at your home, we'd love to share that with the Central family as well. Just snap a picture and you can send it to us at info@centralsj.org. And Merry Christmas as we kick off this Christmas season. So glad that you're here with us. Looking good today for those of you here in the room. And we're looking at that camera. Not only wish those of you joining us online, but those gathered in San Martin, our San Martin family, let's welcome them as well. We're glad that you're with us. Well, have you ever realized after the fact that you missed an opportunity? I feel like every married man has this experience a time or two in their life, a missed opportunity, something you should have said or something you did say that you wish you wouldn't have said. We all have these opportunities that we say, in hindsight, we see in the rearview mirror, we think, man, I just missed an opportunity. I think we would all agree that we wish we would have invested some into Bitcoin in 2010. If you had invested just $100 back then, you'd be worth over $2 billion today. Easy in hindsight. 2010, we're like, what's Bitcoin? And who cares? Why would we waste our money on that? Or maybe it was a test in school and you feel like, man, I'm really prepared for this. I don't think I really need to study. And then you see that first question and you realize you missed an opportunity. Or perhaps it was a relationship that you meant to repair and you just didn't get around to it. And now you sit realizing you missed an opportunity. I saw this video from a Thanksgiving gathering this past week. Maybe you saw it on a reel. This was a news clipping of what took place, and here is another missed opportunity. Check this out.
There's a bow.
Yeah. Bravo. Bravo.
All that food, missed opportunity. In hindsight, in the rearview mirror, it's like, why didn't I lock in the table leg? But in hindsight, you realize you've missed an opportunity. And the reality is, if we're not careful, Christmas will work just like that. You can be surrounded by lights, surrounded by gifts, surrounded by services, surrounded by nativity sets. And if we're not careful, we'll miss the king at the center of it all and realize we've missed a great opportunity. And so this week, as we kick off this new series, The Nativity, we're looking at one of the most familiar and yet most mysterious figures in our nativity set. These guys over here, these wise men, or often called the Magi. We're familiar with them from our nativity sets, but who are they really, and why are they even a part of this scene? If you're taking notes, this is where your notes begin. Here's the big idea. Here's what we learned from this passage that Nancy just read to us. The big idea is this, that some resist Jesus, some ignore him, but wise people will cross any distance and lay down any treasure simply to worship him. And so a good question for us to wrestle with is, why does Matthew include these guys in his nativity story, in the gospel, versus there's 4 gospels in your New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew is the only one to include these guys in his gospel account. And why is that? I think it's important for us to know that Matthew has a very intentional purpose in writing his gospel, as does Mark. Mark, what we've been studying, if you've been with us, then you know that Mark was writing to the Church of Rome. He's writing to a primary Gentile audience, non-Jewish background. But Matthew, on the other hand, he's writing to a Jewish audience. And his message, the clear point that Matthew's trying to make over and over again throughout his gospel account, is that Jesus Christ is the King. And therefore, he writes from that vantage point. So if you look at Matthew chapter 1, you realize he begins with a very boring list of family tree. He starts with the genealogy, and if you've ever wondered, why is that? Well, Matthew's making a point that Jesus' family line, he traces all the way back to King David, letting you know, letting me know, letting the audience at the time know that if there was a king in Israel at this time, Jesus was the rightful heir to the throne. He's a man who's going to sit on the throne of King David forever, and Jewish audiences would have recognized that and realized the significance of that. Not only that, he goes through this royal resume of Jesus, looking at his genealogy, but then he jumps to the climax of chapter 1 with 2 names. He gives us 2 names at the end of chapter 1, and if you're the very last verses, he says this, here's one of his names that he'll be called, and he says this in verse 23, the virgin will give birth to a child, and she'll give birth to a son, and they're going to call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Matthew's saying, check it out. The King of creation is going to leave all the glory of heaven, and he's going to come in the form of a baby. He's going to be born of a virgin, and God, very God, will leave the splendor of heaven. He'll come to this broken humanity to rescue you and to rescue me. And the question is, who is this? Who is this king that will be Emmanuel? Who is this king that will be God with us? And look in verse 24. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel told him and it commanded him to do. So he took Mary to be his wife, but he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son. And he gave him the name Jesus. He's saying, hey, Emmanuel's coming. This is his royal lineage. This is his royal line. He's going to be God with us. And who is he? His name is is Jesus, and Jesus simply means the Lord saves. And aren't you grateful that the Lord saves? Aren't you grateful that Jesus left the glory of heaven, came in the form of a baby, born of a virgin to rescue you, to rescue me, to rescue our broken humanity? And then right on the heels of his royal genealogy, right on the heels of his virgin birth, Matthew gives us his royal coronation scene. And it's not from Jerusalem's elite. It's not from the highbrow of Israel's society. Instead, foreign kingmakers ride in from the east to worship a toddler in a humble home. These men are called magi or wise men. They were dominant kingmakers in the ancient Eastern world, and they were there to confirm and to crown the new king. In other words, the very first people to publicly crown Israel's king weren't Jews. They were Gentiles. They were outsiders. They were apparently nobodies to those who knew who they were. But that's our nativity focus for today. So if you're taking notes, this is where we're going to continue. The next point is this: wise men seek the king. Wise men seek the king. Let's begin to look at Matthew's account. Look at Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, magi, or wise men, those words are used interchangeably, magi from the east came to Jerusalem. They asked, where's the one who's been born king of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and we have come to worship him. So who are these guys? Who are these wise men? Who are these magi? Again, there are a few biblical characters that are so well known and yet so easily misunderstood, so easily to get confused. And so if you'll indulge me for just a few minutes, we're going to take a brief tour through history to discover who these wise men are. And I think it'll allow me to appreciate who these guys are a little bit more clearly, that Matthew so clearly documents in his gospel account. Historically, the Magi first appear in the 7th century BC as a tribe, part of the tribe of the Medo-Persian world. They were part of the priestly class within the Medo-Persian world. They were guardians of secret knowledge. They were interpreters of dreams. They were very practiced in astronomy and astrology, and they were keepers of the religious law and prophecies of this this And because of their practices in divination, because of their practices in the dark arts, we actually get our word magic from this group of people, the Magi. At the root of magic is this term magi, because they practiced sorcery and all kinds of things to interpret and get wisdom and tap into a very real but very dark force. The Magi grew in power as advisors in Persia and the Babylonian Empire. Their influence exploded over time, so much so that the Magi became kingmakers in the ancient world. They controlled the judicial decisions, they influenced political policy, and they were advisors to emperors of their day. And so by the time this prophet by the name of Daniel comes onto the scene, they were the elite scholars of the empire. Men whose voices literally determine the fate of nations. And so let's look at a few examples from the book of Daniel in your Bible and see how these men had influence. Here, let's pick it up in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 5. It says this: the king replied to the astrologers. And so this could be synonymous with the Magi, because this is one of the practices. They study the stars to see what the God is saying to them. This is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me my dream and interpret it for me, I'll have you cut into pieces, and your house is turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me my dream and explain it to me, you'll receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Here's what's happening. At this time, it would be very common for emperors or high-ranking officials to come to these magi, to these wise men, and say, I've had a dream, I don't know what it means, but I need you to interpret it for me. And these magi or wise men had these literally decades and centuries perhaps of dream libraries. And so a high-ranking official would say, here's my dream, could you tell me what it means? And they go to their dream library and they say, so-and-so had this dream on this date, at this time, here's what happened. And then they would use divination and sorcery to try to tap into, again, a very dark art to give interpretation of the dreams. They would present that information to the king or the ruler at the time. But King Nebuchadnezzar, who we read about in Daniel chapter 2, isn't buying it. He's not too sure about these wise men or these magi. So he said, here's the deal, boys. I'm not so sure about you. So before I tell you my dream, I want you to tell me what my dream was and then give me the interpretation. Of which the wise men, much like many of you, would be like, that's not really possible. And so there's this guy by the name of Daniel who is there. He's there not by choice. He's there because he's in exile. Daniel was an Israelite. He's a man of Jewish faith. And he goes to this pagan country to serve this pagan god. And because of his intelligence, because of he was a handsome man, he was allowed to serve with these wise men who had access to the king. So he's there and he hears what's going on. And he replies, look at it in Daniel chapter 2, verse 27. Daniel replied, "No wise man, no enchanter, no magician, no diviner can explain to the king the mystery he's asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." And Daniel's saying, hey, we can't do it, these people can't do it, but God will do it for you. And Daniel is a man, he's a prophet. He hears from God, and he tells the king his dream, and then he gives you the interpretation of the dream. And here's the results. Look at it in Daniel chapter 2, verse 48. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position, and he lavished him with many gifts, and he made him the ruler over the entire province of Babylon. So you got this Jewish guy who's not Babylonian. He's an Israelite. He's a server of the one true God. He's in exile in Babylon. Now he's overseeing the whole province of Babylon. Now watch this next sentence. And they placed Daniel in charge of who? All the wise men. And throughout Daniel's life, throughout Daniel's ministry, he's receiving messages from God. You read the book of Daniel, it's very prophetic, it's very futuristic. And no doubt, as Daniel has these wise men, these men who have influence with the king, these men who have influence with the emperor, he's telling them, hey, there's coming a day when a true king will come. There's coming a day when a rescuer will come. There's coming a day when God, very God's going to leave the glory of heaven. He's going to come to rescue our broken humanity. He's going to be the bridge between you and me and heaven itself. And so hundreds of years later, when wise men see this sign in the sky, these astrologers see this star, they travel hundreds of miles to encounter Jesus. And not only were the wise men or magi, people of authority in Babylon, they were also very prominent in the Persian Empire. And no Persian was ever able to become king without mastering the science and the religious disciplines of the Magi themselves and being approved. Once they passed that test and they were approved by the Magi, then they were crowned by them. And this group was largely, they controlled the judicial appointments of the kings at the time. Let's pick it up in Esther chapter 1. So Daniel, that's a Babylonian empire. Now Esther, this is a Persian empire. Look at it in Esther chapter 1. It says this: since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of the law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times. Watch this. And they were the closest to the king. And then it shares a few names with us. If you're about to have a baby, consider these for your child. 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king. Watch this. And they were the highest in the kingdom. And so these weren't just men wearing bathrobes. These are people of influence. These are people of status. These are people who actually appointed kings to oversee and to rule kingdoms. These are people who are highest in the kingdom. And why do I tell you all this? Here's a couple points of application. Here's number 1. You just need to know that God turns tragedy into testimony. Daniel did not arrive in Babylon by choice. He arrived there by tragedy. He arrived there by exile. He arrived there by loss. He arrived there by displacement, being forced in the service of a pagan king. And you know what Daniel could have done? He could have done what you do whenever you experience the same disappointment. He could have complained. He could have withdrawn. He could have become bitter. He could have said, I give up. But instead, what does Daniel do? He looks to God. He says, God, my eyes are on you. He continues to pray to God. He lived with integrity in the midst of a pagan land for a pagan king. He served with excellence, and he influenced the culture rather than being shaped by the culture. And here's the miracle. Daniel's faithfulness in painful seasons creates a legacy that outlived him by 600 years. And the wisdom he shared, the prophecy he shares, the God-centered worldview that he poured out into a group of men called magi, or wise men, led to kingmakers centuries later arriving at the inauguration of the one true king. So much so that Gentile kingmakers studying the stars, watching the skies, arrive at a very humble home, reminding me today that the greatest impact of your life may come from your greatest pain. because God never wastes a season that's surrendered to him. You may not like it. I know you didn't sign up for it. But God might use your greatest season of pain to become your platform of testimony that he uses to impact not only you, not only the next generation, but perhaps 600 generations later. In Jewish culture, just a side note, not in my notes, but something for you. Jewish culture, they don't have word for tragedy because they had this worldview that if God didn't make it good, then God wasn't done. And so Daniel has this worldview that says, even though I'm in exile, even though I'm a place where I didn't think I would ever be, God, I know somehow, some way you're going to make it good. And the Magi arriving at the birth of Jesus remind us that it didn't happen in Daniel's lifetime the way he thought it might. He would be thrown into a lion's den. He'd be thrown into a fiery pit, all maintaining his integrity, all because he served the one true king. But 600 years later, they arrived to inaugurate the one true king. Second observation from Daniel's life is that God's in control of history. Matthew keeps using this word over and over again. He uses this word fulfilled, fulfilled, fulfilled. He's writing to a Jewish audience saying, hey, this prophecy that took place 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, it's been fulfilled right here, right now. It isn't random. It's God's plan unfolding. Daniel's life shows us that God is not reacting to history. God actually writes history. He positioned Daniel in Babylon. He preserved Daniel's writings for centuries. He guided the Magi through Daniel's influence. He lit up the sky and led them to Jesus. He orchestrated empires, rulers, movements to fulfill the prophecy that he had spoken. He is a promise keeper. History is not chaos. History is choreography. History is not random. It's redemptive. It's actually his story, and he's writing it. And that leads me to a very personal question I have for you. Is how will you allow God to write your story? Will you allow God to write your story? If you're like me, sometimes we can recognize and have this cognitive understanding that God, you're in control of history, but then I try to take the pen and do it my own way. And my question to you is, will you allow God to write your story? And how will you allow God to write your story? Will you surrender the painful chapters? Will you trust him in the confusing pages? Will you let him turn your exile into moments that make an eternal impact? How will you allow God to write your story? Well, let's jump back to Matthew chapter 2. The Magi were powerful in this season, even in this Roman occupancy of Jerusalem and Israel, this time when Jesus was born. These wise men are very powerful, very rich, very wealthy, which is why they would often be depicted as kings, even though they weren't kings, like this nativity set depicts them as kings. We often think of them and see them on Christmas cards riding these camels, but it's most likely that these men of influence, especially with the wealth that they were carrying, there wouldn't have been three of them riding camels rolling into Jerusalem. It would have likely been these men carrying three gifts with mounted cavalry around them, very forceful soldiers. You got to think of high-ranking officials of our day. They don't travel alone. Like, they have security with them. They would have had servants with them to do their cooking, to do their cleaning. There would have been a large contingent of people that roll into Jerusalem. And we see these responses of why Herod responds the way he does, why the religious people respond the way they do, and why these wise men respond they do. So your next fill in the blank there is three responses to the king. Three responses to the king. Every person in Matthew chapter 2 lands in one of three categories, and I would suggest every person here in the room lands in one of these three categories as well. Here's the first option. The first is Herod. Herod responds with hostility, seeing Jesus as a threat to eliminate. Look at it in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 3. It says this, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So these kingmakers from the east roll into Jerusalem, and they have this question, where's the one who's born king of the Jews? And Herod's like, that's supposed to be my title. What do you mean, a king of the Jews? That's the title that Herod was actually given by the emperor. But Herod was a very jealous man. He was a very brilliant man, but he was ruthless. He was paranoid. He killed several of his own sons. His favorite wife, he had multiple wives, but he killed his favorite wife because he suspected her of disloyalty. Caesar Augustus is the one who said it would be better to be Herod's pig than to be his son. Very violent man, very brutal man. And when kingmakers from the east show up looking for the one who's born king of the Jews, Herod's like, what are you talking about? And so not only is Herod disturbed, but all of Jerusalem with him, because they know when Herod's upset, there's going to be bloodshed. And his hostility escalates to horror, and he orders the massacre of all boys 2 years old and under in the vicinity of Bethlehem. Look at it, Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. When Herod realized he'd been outwitted by the Magi, so this is fast forward in a little bit in our story. The Magi outwit him. He's furious, and he gives orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity who are 2 years old and under. Can you imagine the horror? In accordance with the time that the Magi had given him, then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. But today, people don't necessarily order massacres who have this Herod spirit, but here's what a Herod spirit might look like in our midst, and that's simply someone who says, I don't want Jesus messing with my plans, my relationships. Jesus, I know what your word says, but you're not going to mess with my sexuality. You're going to mess with my money. You're not going to mess with my autonomy. And Jesus becomes a threat to eliminate or a threat to ignore or at least something that you push to the fringes of your life. And what about you? How do you respond when God's truth brings confrontation? Second observation is those of religious, and that's indifference. So Herod responds with hostility, but the religious people today, they respond with indifference. And here's the challenge for them. They have information without movement. That they know what's true, they just don't do anything with it. Look at it in Matthew chapter 2, verse 4. It says, when he called together all the people's chief priests, the teachers of the law, he asked them, where's the Christ to be born? They know the answer. They don't even hesitate. They're not like, hey, let me ChatGPT that. No, they know it. They regurgitate it. They say, in Bethlehem, in Judea, they replied. For this is what the prophet has written, but you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel. The chief priests, the scribes, the scholars of the day, they know the prophecy. They know the answers. They just don't do anything with it. They're so engrossed with the religious systems. They're so engrossed in making money. They're so engrossed in theological debates that they don't even bother to walk 5 miles to Bethlehem to see if the real Messiah has actually come. They have information without transformation. They know about the king. They just don't move towards him. And honestly, the modern day response to this is honestly kind of scary. Of all the three, this is my greatest fear for you, honestly. That we would know the Christmas carols by heart. We maybe even be able to explain what's going on in this nativity set and who these different characters are, but never allow our hearts to move towards the real true God. To never move to this place of worship. We can know the answers, but never take what the posture of the Magi do and fall to our feet, our knees in wonder. And somehow the wonder's worn off, and so we stop moving towards Jesus with fresh obedience and worship. I just don't want you that'd be true of you or me this season, so we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Here's the third response, though, the Magi, or the wise men. And they fall in worship before him. And so joy bows and joy gives. So we can respond with hostility, we can respond with indifference, or we can respond in worship. And I think not only is that true of Matthew chapter 2, it's true of us today. Look at it in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 7. It says, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said to them, go, make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. What he really means is let me know so I can go kill him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them. So the star is now moving. Went ahead of them and it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Remember who these magi are. These magi are practiced in astrology. They're practiced in astronomy. They see this bright light. The author describes it as a star, but I would suggest it's not a star as you and I think, not like the sun, not like the star in the night sky. I would suggest to you it's the glory of God, the brilliance of God shining and leading them. And we see this throughout Scripture. This wouldn't be the first time. Exodus chapter 24, verse 17 says, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. Ezekiel chapter 43 verse 2 says, his voice was like the voice of a rushing water, and the land was radiant radiant, bright with his glory. Luke chapter 2, verse 9, an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord was bright. It was brilliant, and it shone around them. And the shepherds, they're like, ah! They're terrified. And every time someone encounters an angel, anytime someone encounters God, there's this element of fear attached with it. Matthew chapter 17, verse 2, this is the mountain of transfiguration. A few disciples go up on this mountain. Jesus meets with Moses and Elijah, and it says this, his face shone like the sun, like a star, and his clothes became bright like light. This is the glory of God being revealed in this moment. Look at this, Revelation chapter 21, 23. This is the new heaven and new earth, so this is what you get to look forward to. There's not gonna be lights, there's not gonna be LEDs, there's not gonna be street lamps, there's not gonna be lighters, there's not gonna be candles, there's not gonna be iPhones with these little flashlights on them. Look at it. It says this, the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it. Why? For the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp. In heaven, there's gonna be bright light, not because of street lamps, but because God's presence, God's glory will be visible to all of us. Now back to Matthew chapter 2. Let's pick it up in verse 9. After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star, I would suggest the glory of God shining in the east, it went ahead of them, and now God's presence, it stops over the place where the child was, letting them know this is the location where you're supposed to be. They're overjoyed. Verse 11 says, on coming to the house where the child was with his mother, Mary. So Jesus is probably 6 months to 2 years old at this time. And so if you have your wise men this close to the baby in the manger, you should probably like put him over there by the guitar somewhere. And by the way, not just 3 of them with camels, bust out the old G.I. Joe set, get some grenade launchers, some bazookas out there, because these dudes are bad, these are bad dudes. And they're traveling with a lot of people and a lot of money. And they bow down. What do? They bow down and they worship him. These are high-ranking kingmakers from the east wearing their royal robes, and they bow down. The Greek word there is proskuneo. We get our English word prostrate. They fall down in a sign of worship, saying, you are the true king, and we're here to recognize you for who you are. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, incense, and myrrh. And I just have to imagine Daniel saying, hey boys, check it out. There's coming a king. And he's gonna be a king like no other king. They're like, oh, he's gonna be royalty. Yeah, but not like royalty like you think. He's gonna leave the glory of heaven. He's come to this broken earth. He's gonna be the king whose rule will reign forever. And they're like, man, we should probably bring him some gold because that seems fitting for a king. And so they pack up the treasure chest of gold. And he's like, yeah, but he's not gonna be a king that rules forever. He's gonna be a priest. And not like a priest like you think, because he's going to be a good priest. He's going to be able to empathize with you in your pain. He's going to be tempted in every way just as you were, yet he's never going to bow his knee to sin. He's never going to experience the pain that you and I experience. He's going to be able to empathize with you, though. So check out, he's going to be a good priest. And so he's not going to be one that beats you over the head. Hey, you screwed up. He's going to say, man, I know. I've been there, and that's really hard. God the Father, I know what they're going through, and we got to help them because that's tough. They're like, oh, he's going to be a priest. We should bring some incense then. They present him with gifts of frankincense. And Daniel's there, he's like, yeah, but he's not just gonna be a king, he's not just gonna be a priest like you've never experienced before. He's gonna actually die a death that we deserve. He's gonna die a death to make payment for a sin that I committed. He who knew no sin is gonna become sin for us. He's gonna be brutally executed because my sin requires it. And they're gonna place him in a grave. But don't worry, he's gonna rise again. And they're like, okay, well, man, we should bring him some myrrh, some burial spice, because that would be fitting for a king. This is the only coronation that Jesus receives on earth. Not from the Sanhedrin, not from their Jewish religious elite, from Gentile worshipers who recognize the kingship of Jesus. So I just wonder if maybe you and I could use an antidote this Christmas so our hearts don't grow cold, so we don't miss an opportunity to bow at his feet and worship him for who he really is. So I want to just give you 5 antidotes to renewing the wonder of who he is this Christmas. Real quickly, here's 5. I invite you to pick one and just Focus on applying one of these to your life this week. Here's the first one. Return to wonder through worship, not just memory. Not just reciting the hymns, not just reciting the Easter story, not just reciting passages, but taking a moment just to pause in awe. God, you're so wise. You orchestrated Daniel and kingmakers from the East decades, centuries before. God, your wisdom knows no boundaries. So God, forgive me for ever limiting you by my limited understanding. Familiarity kills awe, but intentional worship rekindles it. Worship restores what routine has eroded, so an invitation just to return to awe and wonder through worship. Second is return to movement, not just knowledge. And we can all get stuck here. But the wise men remind us that these wise men, they travel a great distance, very inconvenient. I mean, can you imagine riding on one of these bad boys? A great distance to worship the true king. But the religious leaders of the day, they knew the scripture, they had it memorized, but they weren't willing to walk 5 miles to encounter him. The wise men, they not only see Jesus, they don't only know him, but once they see him, they have another moment of movement and they fall face down in worship. What about you? Maybe for the first time this Christmas season, you take a movement and say, I don't have a question, but God, I want to worship you. A moment of surrender. Maybe it's taking a step of obedience that God's been talking to you about, but it feels uncomfortable, feels unfamiliar. Tell that to these guys. They'll do anything to worship him. The cure for indifference is obedience and doing the next best thing that Jesus is asking to do. Third observation, return to presence with Jesus. Just spending time in his presence. We lose wonder when we lose proximity. Here at Central, we exist to help people find and follow Jesus. Following him is taking steps of obedience towards him. Finding him is just pursuing him constantly. It's like this bicycle, that these two pedals, as they work together, you move forward in your relationship with God. You find him, not just in a moment, not just a one-time thing, but on the daily pages of your life. And then you follow him, risky obedience. It's lived on the deep end of the pool, but it's a life that leaves no regrets. So we're gonna return to movement, not just knowledge. We're gonna return to presence with Jesus, just pursuing him in stillness, scripture, solitude, opening our hearts to him. Fourth, we're gonna return to gratitude. Do you know that scientists are now saying you can actually rewire your brain? And that's why gratitude's so important. Some of you, you're just negative Nancy and you don't like it. Not you, Nancy, you're positive Nancy. But some people are just so negative all the time. They're like, oh, I'm just a realist. And I understand that. I feel like I'm a realist too. But together we can rewire our thinking to find the positive, not just always look into the negative. To step into situations and say, wow, not just how. And so gratitude helps us to do this. Not just to know in this season that you have a choice. You can choose to be a positive person, or you can choose to be a pessimistic person. Gratitude helps rewire our brain in that way. Gratitude reawakens what we've taken for granted. Gratitude, a thankful heart, becomes a worshiping heart. And here's the fifth and final one. Return to mission. Invitation just to return to mission. Nothing will ignite your passion more than finding where Jesus is working and joining him with it. And where's Jesus working? Always. He said, I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick. Where the broken people at, that's where I'll be. I came to seek and to save those who are not found, but those who are lost. You partner with him on mission, helping people find and follow Jesus. You'll find your faith becoming alive once again. Here's just one final challenge as we step into this nativity series. When you see the Magi in your nativity set, when you see the Magi in Christmas cards and lawn art, here's just a couple questions to ask yourself. Here's a question. Am I treating Jesus as a threat, as a theory, or as the king? Where do I need to cross any distance to bow down and worship him? And here's the third question. What treasure is he inviting me to lay at his feet this Christmas? They made great physical sacrifice, financial sacrifice to worship the true king, recognizing it's his birthday, it's his coronation. So Central family, let's be those people this Christmas, not just set up the nativity, but let's step into it. Join the Magi, join the wise men, bowing our heads, bowing our hearts, bowing our knees in worship of the one true king. Father, we thank you for the reminder today that you are the King of Kings, that God, you're the one in control of creation itself. You're in control of time. You allow kingdoms to rise and kingdoms to fall. And God, you take tragedy and turn it to our testimony. So God, in the midst of challenge, would you help us to always keep our eyes on you, letting you write our stories, letting you have the pen of our life.